Well, good evening, everyone. We'll get started. My name is David Carrico with Columns Fundraising. I want to welcome everyone here who has joined us this evening. We certainly do appreciate you taking some time to do so. Um, One of the things that I would say is that for those of you who would spend part of your Thursday evening with us exploring these topics is certainly testimony to your passion for building and enhancing the experience of the fraternity and or sorority with which you are engaged, and I commend all of you for doing so. Our speakers this evening have a lot of history, perhaps a lot more history than they would care to admit, in this industry and in the Greek world. Yes, both of our organizations, Columns Fundraising and Alan Lutz's organization, AMG, are in the Greek space, and the things that we do provide a livelihood for our employees and our team members. But I'll say that tonight's conversation is not so much about hawking our wares as it is us sharing some meaningful ideas and some meaningful experience that you might at some point down the road find helpful. We might reinforce some concepts and ideas that you already know, but you need to be reminded of occasionally. Or B, providing some information that whether it's today, next month, next year, might help complement and inform the good work that you do for your own organization or organizations. From my own experience here in Atlanta as a chapter advisor to a couple of chapters, I know that the position is a thankless one at best, perhaps, but I hope that you might be encouraged to know that you're here tonight with a lot of folks who understand your challenges and frustrations and who share your interest in making the sorority/fraternity experience a better one. Before we begin tonight, I'll take a few housekeeping notes. First of all, everyone's muted, so please don't worry if there's a screaming kid or barking dog. I will mute myself around 7:30ish, 7:40ish. Otherwise, you are very likely to hear the 6-year-old boy announcing to everyone within a 2-block radius that he has no intention of taking a bath. So don't worry about things on your end. Unless you unmute yourself, we won't hear the mayhem that's surrounding you. If you have a question, please feel free to submit it during the course of the presentation via the Q&A window. Or if you can't quite figure out how to use that Q&A window, feel free to email them to us at info@columnsfundraising.com. And we'll try to keep an eye on our email queue and get to as many questions as we can tonight. We may not be able to get to all of them in the limited time we have, but we'll try to answer as many as we can. Also, we know that there are others who are not able to join us this evening. If you find that some of the conversation here might be of value to someone with whom you're acquainted, feel free to let us know, again, by sending an email to info@columnsfundraising or to Sherry or Alan, and we'll be glad to send you a link to the recorded presentation that you can share with them. To save time, we're not going to go through biographies tonight because that would take up most of our time. I know that we are perhaps the last thing between you and your binging session on Netflix tonight. So we want to try to move through this as expeditiously as we can. So if you're interested, you can find more information about our respective biographies on these 2 websites. Now, these, of course, are serious times for the last 2 or 3 months. And we're here because we all have challenges ahead of us, both in our volunteer or professional capacity as fraternity and sorority advisors or staff members, as we contemplate a reopening of our houses this fall. Before we get into the serious aspect of today's conversation, however, I thought I would share an image that I saw on Facebook a couple of weeks ago that really resonated with me, that I think some of you may find humorous as well. If you do not know what this is, you're probably under the age of 45, I would guess. But this is a photograph from the movie The Shining. Many of you will know it. If you've not seen The Shining, I encourage you to do so, preferably late at night, by yourself, in a dark and creaky wooden hotel. That's the best scenario to watch this movie. And then you'll understand why this is humorous to some of us. But to get us going now, having made that introduction, I'll turn things over to Alan Lutz, who's principal of Alpha Fraternity Management, So Alan, you want to take it away from here?
Very good, David. Thank you very much for starting us off here. Um, as we approach this fall, we're certainly facing uncharted waters with how we have to approach the situation with COVID-19. And it's very obvious that it's going to have to change the way that we operate, change some of the traditions that we may have, and cause us to have to up our game with the delivery of services, especially greater cleaning services, changes to the meal programs, and several other things. We've been providing webinars for the past 4 or 5 weeks related to this, and the information is changing rapidly. Our company, as well as universities, your national fraternity or sorority offices, are all coming out with COVID-19 action plans and recommendations. We'll touch on some of those technical points as we go through the meeting tonight. But I think what we're really trying to take a look at now is how do we create a thriving, sustainable chapter house operation that's not only going to survive this current COVID battle, but is going to set us up for success for the long term. And from this standpoint, we really take a look at this as fraternity and sorority life is about a lot of things. It's scholarship and service and philanthropy, brotherhood, sisterhood, that sort of thing. And those are our values and concepts that we certainly want to support. But for a chapter house operation, in addition to those, we really need to consider this as a business model. We really need to consider how do we take this business model, given these current challenges and the challenges that we've been facing for a number of years, and turn it into a successful operation. And we know that beginning this fall, we're going to have to provide additional cleaning services and accommodations and a change of operations. We're also likely to face a decrease in occupancy. And so those things are going to really challenge us. We're going to have to do more and potentially with less money. And so what we really want to share today is how to set this up long term. We also see a scenario where over the past 2 or 3 decades, we have seen the view of students towards fraternity and sorority housing largely changing to where it has become more about a temporary place to live, to have social events, to spend maybe 1 year living in the chapter house and then moving on to others. And that's really leaving our groups out on the lurch when we're scrambling to fill beds so that we have the revenue and the income to run a good chapter house operation. And so while we face these challenges, both long-term and these new challenges, understand that this is a time to step up with leadership. But while we have these problems, we also have opportunities to make changes not only to benefit this current challenge, but to look at the opportunities and how we approach this long term to create an improved chapter house experience. And the first part of this is really all driven through financial strength, and as well as a couple of other key concepts that we're going to introduce in a seminar series over the next few months. And there's really 4 key areas that we would like to introduce you to drive the thought and the discussion at your chapter level as well as your alumni level. And I'll just start out with saying that it's time for the leaders to really examine their thought process and how they're approaching this. Do we need a new way of thinking about the chapter house operation? Over the last 20 or 30 years, we've seen it largely become a situation where we have the alumni corporation that is acting as a landlord and the students that are acting as the tenants. And the main goal is to provide a chapter house for them to live in. Well, I personally believe that that is a flawed outlook, that that's resulting too much in a landlord-tenant role that can be more adversarial, and that it's not focused on the right priorities. I would suggest that we look at it with setting the mission that we deliver a great fraternity experience that includes the chapter house, and that it is undergraduates working with alumni members to create that experience that will result in good revenues, that will result in the experiences that entice our members to live in the chapter house for more than 1 year, to set up the policies and procedures now to ensure the baseline that is going to provide a better potential for success going forward. And so the 4 areas that we will look at over the next few months is starting with the policies and procedures to build financial strength through your chapter house operation. A second element that we need to really create a thriving, successful experience is to have operational excellence with the way that everything happens, with the way your members interact with the space, with the finances, with the people in charge. The expectations for service are higher than ever. And in many cases, we see our models lacking in the services that the parents and our members have come to expect. The third thing is that fraternity and sorority housing provides advantages that other housing on campus does not. The dormitories or these new luxury apartments, I mean, they're plush. The amenities and those things are crazy, but there's still things that they cannot deliver, that our members want, that our members will pay a premium for, and that will continue to reside in the chapter house to get access to those programs if we can provide them. And then the last part of this, if we're successful in the first 3 and really focus on it, I think that we're looking at how do we create the culture in the chapter house that's positive, that's supportive of our members, that's supportive of their academics, and that moves them forward in their careers so that they see a debt to the fraternity or sorority for their experience and the out of classroom education that they've received through that. And then through that, an interaction with alumni in a positive way, I think we get back to a scenario where we can start building greater loyalty amongst our graduating members, and looking for them to be engaged, where many of us are fighting to find alumni for our boards. So over the next few sessions, we're going to focus on that. Tonight, we're really going to start with financial strength and how do we build that. Realize that as a business model, if we look at fraternity or sorority chapter house, everything that we do and everything that we have the capability to deliver to our members, more or less, results on the revenues that we can generate to keep the chapter house in good condition, to provide the food service and other programs and the operational excellence that the members desire. And so as a board, it's now time for our leaders to start looking at a big picture, especially if you're challenged with occupancy, and to sit down with your chapter members and really take a hard look at creating a future plan that's going to ensure the revenues that's necessary to deliver a great program and a great chapter house. With that, understand that there's 3 primary places that you can receive revenue from. And it's important that you create programs so that you have revenue opportunities with all 3 of these. The first is the chapter house itself. The second is the chapter house members in paying parlor fees or other sorts of fees that contribute to the revenue stream of the operation. And the third is your alumni through fundraising and gifts and mentorship and and other sorts of contributions that will drive success there. So as we look at creating a thriving chapter house program, the underlying concept, one of the biggest takeaways that we see when we work with new clients that they don't understand is really what the market rates are for the rental market there. They may be going off of information that have been provided by the building residents or the members. They may be looking at ads on apartments.com, all of those sorts of things. And what we find is that most of our clients are charging rates that are 70% or even 60% of what the true market rates are. And so we would recommend that you look closely at the rates on campus for other housing sources, including the dormitories, large houses, apartment buildings, and so forth, and look at what it costs in an apples to apples standpoint. If you offer a lease that is an 8 or 9 month lease, that's an advantage that's worth something and is due a premium. If you're offering including internet and heating and cooling and all the utilities and internet and even cleaning services, those are all things that have value. And so making sure that you're at the market rates is important. When we do this, we approach it in an appraisal format, doing adjustments for different amenities, different lease terms, and so forth. But if you have no other source, go to the university website and look at its housing and see what it's charging for similar room types and bathroom accommodations to what you're providing. And they usually have a way that you can back out food service, the food service program in the dormitory to try to get to rates. And I would suggest that you be at least at 90, if not 95% of that rate for what the dormitories are charging for an apples to apples program for your housing and or food service. The other thing that I would recommend is that you work with your undergraduates to develop a program that's going to consistently deliver the targeted income necessary for the chapter house to support its operations. And that's no matter if you have 1 bed empty or 10 beds empty. And there are several strategies to do that. We're seeing some campuses and clients and organizations going to require a 2-year lease commitment that's signed as a requirement for initiation. In that case, once the chapter house gets full, there's a mechanism for people to opt out of that 2nd year living in if they so choose. To look at programs in which the chapter pays a set rent to the house corporation, and whether that's through a master lease agreement with subleases that support it, or through what we call an operating agreement that dictates that the house corporation in this program will receive a minimum targeted income, or whether you look at implementing a membership agreement that members would sign prior to initiation, in which they commit to live in the chapter house for a minimum amount of time, typically 4 semesters. And if they choose not to meet that, there is a financial penalty where the rent from the empty beds is divided up by all of the members that didn't meet that live-in requirement, and they pay those what we call low occupancy fees. So establishing, so you have consistent revenue no matter how many people are living in the chapter house, is essential. And then also, we find that if you compare this to campus housing, that many times we are giving away many valuable amenities. That if we look at campus landlords, they're typically charging $125 to $150 per month for parking. And so without raising your rent, if you just begin charging the members that have a car on campus and desire to park in the lot, you know, $1,500 to $1,800 per year for a parking space, and you have 20 parking spaces, I mean, that adds up to some serious money that will help support that operation and make improvements and replacements to that. Also, understand that it's not a dirty word to make a little bit of money on your food service program. Food service is one of the competitive advantages that we can provide. We often don't provide the best food service programs, but when we do, they are really treasured by our members. And so if you're feeding 40 members a day and you include a little bit of margin, let's say $50 a month on your food service program, again, we're adding up to $10,000 to $15,000 of additional revenue a year that can all go to support your chapter house operation. And this isn't a situation where we are looking at a profit motive. We're looking to provide a competitive housing asset that our members want to live in and the services that they desire. And that takes money. And if you compare to what other campus landlords are offering, you know, that's why they're charging the rates that they are. Our second area for revenue streams is from our members. And I touched on this a second ago. We need to have live-in requirements. And we find that the way to work through this frequently is to work with the current chapter officers and look to begin a program that will apply to people that will be initiating in the future. It seems much easier to swallow when they can understand the situation and realize that they aren't going to be the ones that are going to have to be compromised or have to meet some new requirements. And we found that a very effective strategy. I touched on membership agreements. Membership agreements we feel are vital, not only for ensuring income, but for defining the expectations of membership, defining that they are going to pay chapter dues for the entire time that they are undergraduates. That will generally increase your chapter finances by 15 to 20% alone by capturing revenue from distant juniors or seniors as they don't engage. Those things are crucial, and we can share templates for some of these things or share strategies for that, but just understand that there are vehicles out there that will deliver ongoing revenues from the members, multi-year leases, and then out-of-house fees. Additionally, many of our groups have 3 times as many out-of-house members as we have living in the chapter house now. They come to that house and they use it many times harder than the residents that are living there for the social events and so forth. There's no reason why they can't be making a semesterly contribution towards the upkeep and expenses, the utilities and so forth that are delivered there. And so we typically see on the low end an out-of-house member charged a parlor fee of $100 semester. We've seen them as high as $600 a semester for the out-of-house members. And in the South, where they do fraternity kind of a different fashion there, we've seen out-of-house fees be in the $1,000 ranges. But typically somewhere between $100 and $200 a semester is perfectly acceptable. And again, you have 75 out-of-house members at $200 a semester. You know, now we're talking real money. And you employ a few of these concepts and suddenly you've got an extra $50,000 a year or more to turn around and put back into programming or the chapter house. And it doesn't take long to see the chapter house going from what might be an average or marginal asset to something that over a period of 5 or more years can turn into a very competitive, desirable housing asset. And then alumni. Alumni members, there's always a portion of our alumni members that remain very loyal and very dedicated. And with that, we need to look at them as a way to help, especially during a crisis time like this. This is a great time to look at those opportunities. And I think with that, I'm going to turn this over to our friends at Columns, who can share more specifically about alumni giving and revenue streams and how to go about that.
Thanks,
Great.
Alan.
Thank you, Alan. So two types of revenue from a fundraising standpoint from our alumni base: annual giving and capital giving. But before we even get to the fundraising side of things, let's talk about what needs to happen actually before we ever ask for any money. First and foremost, communication, especially now. Your alumni, your undergraduate members, your parents, your college administrators on various campuses want to know what is happening in your chapter. Communication is key. So if we want to be successful in building long-term fundraising programs at our local chapters, we have to communicate. Generally, we recommend 2 hard copy or printed, snail-mailed newsletters to chapter alumni on an annual basis, an additional 4 to 6 e-blasts during the academic year, just updating everyone on the chapter. We also recommend a minimum of 2 solicitations on an annual basis, spring and fall. Alan alluded to the way fraternities and sororities operate a little bit differently in the South. Saturday afternoon tailgates and football games are pretty big. For those of you that don't know, in SEC country, and that is a great time for soliciting your alumni during the fall football games. So again, we need to communicate before we start asking. When we do ask, we have 2 ways of doing that. First being annual giving. Some chapters in various fraternities and sororities have outstanding annual giving programs. There is no reason with a strong communication program and an efficient annual giving program that you can't add to the revenue stream, as Alan was detailing various things. You can add $6,000 to $10,000 to $15,000 a month. We have worked with chapters that easily do $10,000 a month direct deposit from their alumni into the House Corporation account. That is just on an annual basis. It requires management, so you have to have some very loyal alumni that are willing to take this on and make some calls. But again, when you're talking revenue streams, that is a large chunk of money through the annual giving program. On the capital side, we recommend a capital campaign every 8 to 10 years. Chapter houses obviously are high volume, and some of our structures that are 50 or 75 years old, they don't take it well anymore when there are more than 100 humans going through the chapter house every day. So we need to be on top of our capital needs in the chapter house, and therefore consider capital campaigns to help with that. Before you decide to move into some type of capital fundraising program, you certainly want a 5-year or a 10-year capital budget prepared. You need to plan for anything that can go wrong in an aging structure, plan that it will go wrong. The roof, new carpeting, new flooring, new painting, HVAC systems, new windows, anything that can go wrong will go wrong in a heavily trafficked chapter house. We all know that. So have your 5 and 10-year capital giving budget put out there. And we've been talking about asking alumni for gifts on an annual and on a capital basis. One group to never underestimate is the parent group. Parents obviously want to make sure their sons and daughters are living in safe and healthy environments. We lean toward thinking with this whole pandemic that there are parents out there that are going to feel more comfortable with their sons and daughters in chapter houses with 40 beds as opposed to dormitories with 500 beds. Less space to control than a large dormitory on a large college campus. So don't underestimate the parents. We were recently working with a sorority chapter at an SEC school, and they had a family step up and pledge $125,000 to a new chapter house campaign. Two of their daughters are current undergraduate members in that chapter. Previous experience that I've had with my fraternity when I worked on staff more than 30 years ago, started a parent giving program through our foundation. And that program grew and raises substantial thousands of dollars every year. Parents want to give, but they must be asked. So let's not underestimate that group. The number one reason people give is because they're asked. Someone asked them to support the project or join with them in the project. It's not tax incentivized giving. Study after study through the years have proven that the number one reason people give is because they are asked. What's the worst they could say? They could say no. And if we follow the old sales adage, someone has to say no 3 times before they really mean it. And then if we take it one step further, after 6 months, start asking them again those next 3 times. People need to have the opportunity to give. So in order to talk about how we ask and why we ask, I'd like to turn it over to my business partner, Wes Wicker, to talk about asking for gifts now.
Thanks, Mark. You know, we get a lot of questions from our clients and friends in the Greek world, and the question is often in the last 2 months is, can we ask for gifts now? Is this a good time to ask? And I always respond, absolutely. The groups that perform the best, the groups that raise the most money are the ones who don't stop. And I think one of the fatal flaws that occurs in the nonprofit world is oftentimes when a crisis like this occurs, a recession, a housing bust, whatever the event is, some nonprofits stop asking. But the ones who are successful are the ones who don't stop asking. And Mark gave an example of a recent $120,000 gift. We're working with a theatrical outfit right now. And you would think in this age of the coronavirus that support for theaters and artistic groups would probably be somewhere even lower than Greek organizations. But in fact, they never stopped their campaign. And they recently had a donor write a check for $100,000 in the last week. So don't stop asking. One of the things I would remind you is that, you know, the stock market's come back. It dropped down. The Dow dropped down under 19,000, but as of today, it's over 25,000, which is a bit ahead of where it was this time last year. So the market is on its way back. Also remember that some people's wealth is not in the stock market. There are a lot of people who keep their cash invested in real estate or in a more liquid portfolio. So some people haven't been affected by this economic downturn as much as others. The other thing I would tell you is long-term investors by large and whole are still looking at a portfolio full of profits, because in the last 3 years, we've had the greatest run in the stock market in the history of the United States. So even though we're down now from where we were in mid-January, people who've been invested in the market 5, 10, 20, 30 years have huge profit margins in the market. So our message is do not stop asking. And don't be presumptuous and assume that if you ask one of your alumni or alumnae that they will say no. Let the donor make that decision. Don't make the decision for them. And finally, remember that this is about your mission of helping young men and women become outstanding citizens, become outstanding parents, become the people we want all of our children to be. It's about the mission, not the economy. So I'll close this off tonight, reminding you of a quote from John D. Rockefeller. Never think that you need to apologize for asking someone to give to a worthy cause. You're offering them an opportunity, and I would encourage you to invite them to make an opportunity to invest in your organization. So at this time, we will conclude our presentation, and I'll turn it back over to David Carrico for questions.
Great,
David?
thanks, Wes. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions here. The first one we'll address. Someone says that from the national fraternity level, we're trying to keep membership dues down because the added cost of fraternity living is keeping quality men from joining. At the local level, and Alan, I'll ask you to respond to this question just so you can get prepared mentally. Wes has addressed a little bit about this, but the question really is the suggestions regarding monetizing things like parking, food services, etc., might strike some people as being a little tone deaf in these times. I think that Wes has made a good case for why we continue to solicit. And as a compliment to what Wes has already said, I'll add that we had a conversation with a Fraternity Foundation member about 2 weeks ago who said that they had had their best day of giving result ever. So clearly people are still philanthropic. Clearly, not everyone's priority is going to be fraternity or sorority as much as we all think it could and should be. Some people may well consider us a little bit tone deaf for asking for gifts for a fraternity or sorority when they don't get it, but there will be many people who will respond. So Alan, I'll go back to you for a moment on what I think were your very good suggestions on monetizing parking, food service, etc. How do we frame that to implement this in the very near term? Or do we perhaps begin building the infrastructure for it to be in place maybe this time next calendar year? Are you afraid or not afraid to start implementing those things right now?
So a lot of good questions in there, and I'll just start by saying that first we have to be empathetic to our members and the challenges that they may have. At the same time, understand that our members are paying those fees or higher fees that I just mentioned when they are either living in the dormitories or when they're moving out of our facilities into large houses, luxury apartments, those sorts of living conditions. And so this may be a situation where we're just not used to paying for these amenities or charging for these amenities, but we're about the only housing source out there that isn't doing those sorts of things. So it's not as unusual as we might think. And I would look at definitely implementing this over a period of time or beginning the discussions now for things that are going to be implemented in the future. And so I believe that it makes sense that these decisions are made with the inclusion of the chapter officers and their input and their understanding. From my standpoint, I can sell a parking fee that allows me to keep the rent lower for the members that are living in the chapter house that don't have a car. That it's the people that have a car that are paying for that special amenity. And so there's a ways to frame this and understand that it is generally the parents that are the consumer that are making the payments here. And so what you need to do is educate the parents, share information on what true campus rent costs are if you've done a rent study or had a company like ours perform a rent study for you, so that they understand that the fraternity or sorority is a great value, that the amenities that they're getting there that they wouldn't get elsewhere, that the additional cleaning services and things that we may be providing are real value, as well as the life experiences that their members, that their children are going to get. So there needs to be a little bit of marketing and communication to our members and parents so that they really understand what's going on out there and that they can be phased in and communicated in a way that doesn't make it look too greedy or a money grab or something like that. So that would be some of my suggestions.
Sure. That makes sense. Wes, we have a two-part question for you, incorporating one question from me and one from Hall Jones. So get your pencil down to write this so you can remember these. Hall asks, it is of course a campus question, but what are expectations for fall rush relative to past years? And I'm going to ask you to put on your Theta Chi hat. For those of you who don't know Wes is the vice president of Theta Chi's National Housing Corporation. So he hears a lot more about the housing issue than I, for one, personally do. So Wes, what do you hear from your fraternity? And Mark, perhaps you might chime in what you hear from Phi Gamma Delta about fall rush expectations. And secondarily, Wes, what have you heard from your position with the House Corporation? What sort of interesting strategies have you perhaps heard from local house corporations about how they're addressing the COVID-19 response? What sort of precautions they might be putting into place if someone in the chapter, for example, suddenly tests positive for the virus?
Sure. First on the rush, I was recently on a webinar with the Institute of Higher Education, University of Georgia, which is an autonomous think tank that studies higher education across the United States. And it was an interesting conversation about fall enrollment, because the consensus was of about 30 institutions that were represented on the webinar is that in many cases enrollment is up. At some of the small regional state institutions, they're reporting as much as 5 to 6% decrease in enrollment. But at the large flagship universities and the selective private institutions, that enrollment will actually be up next fall. Part of that is the college students, by and large, across the country, really didn't like this shutdown. They're itching to get back to campus. And there's a lot of momentum among college students to get the world back to normal. As bad as this has been, bear in mind that of the millions of college students enrolled in colleges and universities across the United States, there have only been 35 deaths. The group least affected in the United States is the population under 30 years old. And of those 35 deaths, all 35 had pre-existing conditions. So the chance of a college student having gotten COVID this year is somewhere in around 1 in 350,000. So the sentiment is among the professionals out there is they're going to see a slight enrollment increase and at worst a slight decrease. To your other point, David, with housing, I've seen some interesting recommendations. One chapter has rented an apartment off campus, and if a brother in that chapter were to contact COVID-19, they're going to immediately move him out of the house into the apartment. And so they've set up an alternative housing method to have any undergraduate who might test positive move out of the house. My personal opinion is that we are dealing with as much as a pandemic as a public relations issue here. And I don't think parents would be too pleased to hear that we have a student, a brother or a sister in a Greek organization who tested positive, and the chapter has tried to isolate them in the house. Most of our chapter houses were not built to isolate members. You have typically community or shared bathrooms, shared dining facilities. And so the recommendation we're making to our chapters from the Housing Corporation position is to move any member out of the house. The other thing I might suggest is to have the house completely sanitized before the members move in, and then periodically cleaned by a professional cleaning service during the year. Many of our chapters already do that, but I think in light of what has happened, it will certainly make the parents feel better knowing that we have professional cleaning services who are routinely moving through our houses.
Good. Mark, any additions to that from the Phi Gamma Delta perspective? Well, you're muted, so we can't hear you anyway, so that's just as well. Our next question comes from Jan Merchant, and I think, Alan, this is probably relevant both to the fundraising side and to you. Question is, do you think having a live-in house director might help with planning, surveying, and developing financial strategies, and then to our part, annual giving and capital giving? To address the fundraising piece of that question, I could see a house director potentially helping with some annual fund solicitations. Without experience in capital fundraising, I would think that raising significant amounts of money, by significant, I mean $500,000 to $1 million plus, that sort of thing, maybe even $100,000 or more. Capital giving is probably not going to be an appropriate thing for them to try to tackle. Not literally, but I laugh sometimes when I see people who have never asked someone for $100,000 or for $500,000 doing it the first time. I don't laugh because I remember how I felt doing it the first time. But capital campaigns are a completely different animal from annual fund solicitations. A house director might be able to send out some decently worded letters to raise a few $1,000s a year, but I don't think the capital side is appropriate. Alan, what are your thoughts on a house director relative to the planning, surveying, and financial strategies outside of the philanthropic?
So we believe that a house director or a resident advisor, someone that has a little more maturity, that is living in the chapter house, is a benefit to the operations and is going to be an element that will help deliver the operational excellence that we'll talk about in our next seminar. The model is a little different. The model is evolving. We're seeing that be more of a graduate student or a young professional model. And their duties tend to be focused on the operations and seeing that the operations are executed well. Parents like that model. They desire it. Where the model doesn't work is where you have a chapter that has a very bad culture, and that's something that should be addressed otherwise. So, you know, I have a saying that fraternity works better when there's an adult in the room, and that fits the bill of a resident advisor many times.
Good. Another question that we have here, and Wes, I'll throw this one to you. Who should be asking for those larger gifts? We said the house director is probably not the appropriate person. Who, and this is a pretty broad question, but who should be asking for those larger gifts?
Well, ideally, in a capital campaign, you're going to have a campaign chairman who is not the president of the house corporation. President of a house corporation has plenty on their shoulders without running a capital campaign. In fact, we recommend that while there could be overlap between capital campaign committee members and house corporation members, it's really a different skill set of raising money versus running a facility, and oftentimes a multi-million-dollar facility. So in my opinion, it's the person, the alumnus, who has a great deal of respect and recognition among the alumni. I would choose an alumnus who, number one, feels confident in making the solicitation, and number two, the alumnus who knows the person they're sitting across the table from. So solicitations always work better when it's a peer-to-peer solicitation and the person making the ask has a history and a close relationship with the person who is receiving the ask.
And Wes,
And I think Mark is going to add to that probably the fact that we want the person asking to have made her or his own gift, preferably a much larger gift, so that they can invite that person to join them in making a gift or challenge them to meet their gift. Mark, am I incorrect in what you were about to say?
Oh, that's spot on, David. I was going to say, if you're asking someone for $100,000, it's always most effective to have done that yourself, so that I can say, Wes, I'd like you to join this campaign and consider matching my commitment of $100,000. That's a lot easier than having a campaign chair that gives $500 asking another brother or sister for $100,000. It just doesn't sound as right, not as much skin in the game.
Very good. And we had an update from Jan on her earlier question. She said that she was thinking of the live-in house director question, more in terms of parents and alumni feeling more secure knowing that there is a live-in adult as opposed to those houses without one. And I think, Alan, you addressed that spot on by saying that in the fraternity and sorority world, there needs to be an adult in the room. Jan, I hope that answered your question appropriately. Alan, we have one other question that I'll direct to you, which was, our house isn't in the best shape. Back to your point about market rates. Our house isn't in the best shape. Should we be charging market rent?
That's a question for me,
Yes.
David?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So again, I think you have to be sensitive to the market and not overreach, because what you can sometimes get is a situation where you'll have a few members start to bail out because they perceive the cost is too high. And then you get a bunch of members bailing out, and you end up with a larger problem on your hands. So it should be comparable to the housing in the area. But understand that if you provide some of the competitive advantages that we'll be talking about in a future webinar, and one of those major advantages is that these young men, especially, they want to live with their friends. They want to live with their fraternity brothers. And most parents these days will write the check to allow the son or daughter to live where they feel best within reason. So don't be afraid to ask for rent that's competitive with other similar housing in the marketplace. Be sensitive to it. Another strategy that we employ sometimes, where we have a few members that are price sensitive, excuse me, sorry, is that we will charge market rates and then have a housing scholarship program, where if a member has financial need, or if a member accomplishes certain tasks that are aligned with the values and the mission of the fraternity, that they'll receive a discount on the rent to make it more affordable. I frequently tell house corporations and parents that I don't want money to be a reason why your son or daughter can't live in the chapter house. That if there is a need or there's a concern there, let's deal with it privately. Let's figure out a solution. Let's figure out a way to have that person live in the chapter house and get this beneficial experience. And that has been successful many, many times. I think understand what the market is, charge for comparable rates, focus on your competitive advantages. And as you build those competitive advantages, even though your physical plant may not be where you want it to be, you're providing value that's worth additional rental dollars.
Good. We had one other question that might as well stay right there, Alan. We have another question that's directed at your expertise, which is, you mentioned that there were two different ways to approach the rental agreement: the agreement with the chapter writ large for a lump sum, or the member to house corporation lease. Do you find that either is preferable in the current market, or are they equally as effective?
Sure. we could do a 2-hour seminar just on that particular topic because there's a lot of passion about which is the correct way to set that up. I think the underlying premise is that there has to be a mechanism to deliver a set level of rent to the house corporation that's not dependent upon the number of individuals that live in the chapter house. And the second element is there needs to be an ability for the housing leaders, which is typically the house corporation, to be able to address a problem with a resident, whether that is someone that's not paying their bills or someone that is not living up to the fraternity expectations regarding risk management or something like that. And so there's generally two structures. One structure is with an operating agreement with the chapter for a set level of rent and independent leases from the house corporation to the member for their living areas, or a situation where you have a master lease with the chapter and a sublease to the individual members from the chapter to the individual members, but there's a clause in that sublease that allows the house corporation to be assigned the lease in a condition of default, or to take add additional rules or regulations in a situation like COVID-19. So a good attorney will be able to guide you through that process. And I think if you concentrate on the elements of being able to impact problems if they occur within the chapter house and delivering a set level of rent, those are the two key things that will keep you out of problems many times. And if people wish, for our clients, we provide templates of those sorts of documents and discuss the pros and cons that are out there. I'd be happy if someone wanted to give me a call and discuss those things. Be happy to give them some free consulting with the goal of creating a better fraternity industry, a better sorority industry, and meet our overall mission that was discussed earlier.
Great. I may call on you that personally, Alan, because I'm going to start charging my 6-year-old some rent. The guy's killing me. Those are really all the questions we have this evening. Before I turn it back over to you, Alan, for some closing thoughts and comments, Mark and Wes, I'll ask you guys if there's anything that's come to mind that we have not mentioned that we should have. We want to interject here.
I'm not.
David, did we mention the number one reason people give? It's because they're asked.
I think we did mention that.
Okay.
And secondarily, before I turn it over to Alan, I want to apologize for Wes Wicker's background. For anyone who's in the SEC school other than the University of Alabama, he's in his University of Alabama shrine room right now. So our apologies to any Bulldog fans, any Gator fans, et cetera, Auburn fans who may be watching. We appreciate you not throwing virtual eggs at Wes, though he deserves it. Alan, we certainly do appreciate the opportunity to participate here with you today, and I'll turn it over to you for some closing thoughts and comments before we get back to Netflix.
Great. Thank you, David, Mark, Wes, Scott. We also appreciate the leadership and the knowledge that you're sharing. This is great when we can bring industry leaders together to try to help each other really overcome a challenging situation. And let's be clear, this is a crisis. We didn't spend a lot tonight on how many doorknobs should be cleaned, how often, or what type of spoons to use in the kitchen. I mean, that's all coming. And I believe that before the end of June, there's going to be some very clear communications coming out with those recommendations, and you'll be able to implement that. So know that those are coming, and know that as a team of undergraduates and alumni that you're going to have to work together on those items. But let's be clear, this is a crisis, and a crisis is a time where leaders step up and you have to make bold decisions. And so this is a case where I would really urge you to take a look at your entire operations, your entire mission, and why you're doing this, and decide to become a great organization. decide to work harder to fulfill that mission and set the programs and the operations and the people in place that can help you with that. And understand that there are tremendous resources in our industry. The people that are on this seminar, the people that are affiliated associates and sponsors of the NIC and other industry groups that are out there to help you. And when you look at it as a business model, these professionals, yes, there are some fees involved, but more times than not, they deliver more value than the fees that they're charging. And so while there's a cost on a expense statement for using a management group or a fundraising organization, realize that they're going to more than pay for themselves through efficiency and effectiveness and knowledge that you don't have to go through in trial and error. And also understand that we are tremendously challenged with finding alumni volunteers that can deliver the consistent effort month over month that it takes. And so by implementing some of these strategies here, you have the financial strength, the revenue stream to get some professional help in areas where you may be weak, that will just build on these programs and help you deliver these services. And again, we'll share opportunities for professionals that can help with some of these things in future seminars, but just realize that that help is out there. And when you really look at the bottom line, it may strengthen your bottom line, not reduce it. So with that, I say thank you for everyone that has participated. Thank you to our friends at Columns. Please feel free to reach out to either organization going forward with follow-up questions on this or to discuss specific issues. We want to help. We want to see your organizations grow, be strong. It helps all of us when that happens. And this is frankly the sort of effort that it's going to take to rebuild the image of fraternities as creating value for our young people and being the assets on our campuses that we really are. So with that, thank you very much.
Thanks, Alan.